Hey everybody, my name is Raymond Johnson. You may know me from the Lit RPG audiobook podcast, or you may know me from short stories that I've written that have appeared in things like Viridian Gate Online, Side Quest, Dakota Kraut's Essence, Surviving Ludus with Blaze Corvin, and Tales of Dungeons from Jeffrey Falcon Logue, amongst others. I also have a bunch of short stories in horror genre, but I doubt that you've ever seen any of that. But anyway, today I will be reading, per BF Rock River's thoughtful idea, where he's allowing authors to read from their novels. I'm going to be reading chapter one, from NGS to Nightmare Games System. This came out in November on Election Day. Um, in fact, you can see right here, I actually commemorated it by putting in "I love voting" in my book, so that I would never forget the day that I actually had the book released, which was November 3rd. So, a little side note for you. NGS is something that I really wanted to write for a long, long time, um, because it melds two of my favorite things, which is lit RPG and horror. Horror being like something I've grown up with my entire life. Everything I do in my life is based basically on what you see in horror movies, whether it's about whether zombies will attack us and how will we survive, or if my best friend becomes a werewolf. Yes, and I do have those scenarios play through my head on a constant basis. If you ask me where I needed to go to save myself from zombies, I can happily tell you very, very quickly where to go to in my area. But NGS kind of stemmed from my love of horror and my love of lit RPG. And what I did was I made it where, the trope, what would happen if you got stuck in the video game? That's one of my least favorite things to read in lit RPG. I mean, I'm not a very big fan of like slice of life stuff. I like to have a very definitive story that goes from A, B to C and then completes. Um, and one of my least favorite things that I read about is trapped in a game. And I'm not saying I don't like every trapped in a game novel. Trapped in a game is a trope for a reason. And that's because it works and it's easy to do. But I started thinking, how can I do something with this? And as you see in chapter one, I get into it pretty quickly. What happens when you do become trapped in a video game, basically? Uh, but it's based on a horror world. Most places are fantasy or sci-fi, and in this case, my lead character Ramzan is stuck in a nightmare world, totally devoid of any hope. So I thought, here's how I get him in, and do I ever let him out? Is he really trapped? And so, find that part out, you have to read the whole book. So, I'm just going to give you a first chapter. I will do my best at doing voices. I am not a narrator by any means. This is going to be a cold read. I haven't looked through it since I've written it. Um, so, I don't know every word that's going to be popping up. Hopefully, I'll be able to pronounce the Russian stuff pretty well. If not, it's just my language barrier. I try, but and I actually have a friend who is Russian. My wife's best friend is literally from Russia. She just came over a few years ago, um, and they got to start hanging out as our kids went to school. So the words used in this book are from her. Are from her. They're verified, I should say. I looked everything up. I've done a lot of research, and I wanted to make the story based on mafia, and I wanted to do Russian mafia for a couple of reasons. Um, Trying to be realistic, the Italian mafioso has pretty much died off. I mean, yeah, they exist, but they're not like they were at one time, like in the 40s, 50s, even 60s. And so I didn't want that to be like, yeah, I really don't believe that that's the case where these guys are doing this. I didn't want it just to be standard crime syndicate of just people who are really smart and criminals basically. I didn't want to use the Tong or the Yakuza. It's too far from my safety point where I feel comfortable writing something like that. But Eastern European mafia, the Oshina, and the Russian mobs, they're really prevalent in the United States, and I don't think that. Well, if you watch John Wick, you'll see a lot of stuff like that with them in it now. Uh, but I don't think they get the news play that they deserve because they're really hardcore people. So before I start, I'm going to say in very plain English, this is not um, a simple story. It gets hard really fast. I believe in horror and I do believe in gore. And While I toned it down to what I perceived it to be like a PG or mild PG rating, I've had people tell me that it's pretty traumatizing. In fact, one of the narrators of the book said that it gave him nightmares as he was doing this. And I've had other people tell me it's just too rough. And I won't go through the character mutilation part, which is what I call it rather than character creation. So you won't have that worry. But even this scene, I talked with Jamie Davis, the writer of the accidental things. You know, as you go through the accidental mage and the accidental thief and the accidental whatever, he does all that series. And he even said it was really grim and reminded him of the scene from Taken where the guy's strapped to a chair and being electrocuted. And I can get that. It's pretty dark. It does get pretty dark. So if you can't handle this sort of stuff, then you want to stop right now and not even listen, because I believe in a couple things. And the first thing is you get into this story, into the game as quickly as possible. And that's what I do. I don't play around. I don't give you the lead up to this. It starts right at the moment of getting into the game. So, without further ado, The Nightmare Game System, read by Raymond Johnson. Chapter 1, Opening Credits. An unwanted reservation at the hotel. "You should know better than to mess with the Obshina boy," said the bearded man. His voice was a deep basso, and while his Russian was good, he wasn't native. His accent gave him his way as a Vanka. In simpler terms, a Chechnyan. The Obshina were the Russian branch of the Chechnyan mafia. He had suspected as much when they dragged him off the street and stuffed him into the back of a van, but the bear of a man confirmed his fears with his simple speech patterns. He had been foolish enough to think that he could steal from them, and now he was duct taped to a chair and about to die. They were going to make him tell them where he'd stashed the money, and once they retrieved it, they would kill him. But there was no way in hell he could tell them. The man in the chair had given the money to his younger sister, Yekaterina, in the hopes that she would leave Russia and make a better life for herself. His haul had been just over 33 million rubles, roughly $500,000 American dollars. Not as much as he would have liked, but enough. He'd given it to her with instructions to leave her and never come back, and not to tell anyone where she was going. The man knew the likelihood of his capture being high, but she had always been his priority. He would hold out as long as he could, but eventually he'd talk. Everyone always did. But his plan was simple. Name a friend of his who had died in a recent automobile accident. Vadim as the man holding the money. Once they realized he had no idea where the money really was, and that there was no way of getting it back, they would kill him, and Yekaterina would be safe. All he needed was the strength to keep quiet. The Ursine man before him rubbed a hand over his bald scalp, then rolled up his sleeves and tilted his head, looking at Ramzan like a dog hearing a strange noise. "You are foolish, young Ramzan," he said with a toothy grin. "I can already see in your eyes that you will not talk. This is bad. Is very bad for you." Ramzan glared defiantly from his chair. "I know you are going to kill me. I don't care. I will never tell you where the money is. I can take torture. You don't scare me." Ramzan wasn't kidding. He had grown up hard. Beatings, pain, suffering, they were old friends to him. His pain did not matter, but his sister's life did. He would endure any nightmare they could dish out for her sake. The brute looked disheartened. "That is true. We kill you. Eventually. You have sat right on those brass tacks you were so quick to get to, you know. As for torture, not so much. We like to let you torture yourself." "Hell, boy! We will let you kill yourself, too." Spittle flew from the giant's mouth in the spray that covered Ramzan's face. Ramzan scanned the empty room. There was no plastic on the floor, but he doubted that the Obshina would care about leaving things like blood spatter around. They were more like those cowboys of the American West. Shoot first and worry about the body count later. And If and when it came to that, Ramson planned on making them work for every drop of his blood. Bite off his tongue to keep them from learning anything. He would happily arrive in hell a mute before giving them satisfaction. My name, the big man said as he thumped a fist on his chest, is Stanislav. I tell you this so you know that you will never make out of here alive. Nothing. He leaned in and breathed toilet breath into his face. And I mean nothing will change that fact, Ramson. Stanislav reached behind Ramson to the back of the folding chair he sat on and lifted him like a rag doll. I show you. He carried Ramson without an ounce of effort into a dark concrete hallway. The floor sloped downwards and showed signs of moisture. The area was dimly lit, but Ramson thought he could see large rats scurrying out of the way as Stanislav approached. The hall ended at an open doorway, and Ramson heard an electrical hum. His captor carried him like a baby into the room beyond. It, too, was dimly lit, but it was dry inside. A dehumidifier ran somewhere just out of sight. He recognized the sound instantly, as his mother's house had flooded every spring, and the dehumidifier was the only thing that kept mold from eating their house. The Chechenin turned, and the room came into view for Ramson. There was a line of people, 10 after a quick head count, also duct taped to folding chairs. They all wore the same bizarre contraption, a spherical helmet that completely encased their heads. Dirty wires sprouted from the tops and trailed behind them like diseased vines. None of them moved a muscle, or acknowledged that they had entered the room. He wondered briefly if this was some new form of torture, but he dismissed that thought. There was no sign of pain or suffering. They sat, silent and immobile, as if they had no idea what was taking place around them. No. This was something else entirely, and for some reason it scared him. Ramson had been shot, stabbed, and beaten. While horrifying, he had intimate knowledge of what they entailed and could do with it mentally and physically. But the state of these strangers unnerved him on a deeper level. Their placidity screamed out to him. There was something very wrong with the people in this tiny room. Stanislav grinned at his confusion. You ever hear of American MMORPGs? This is one of them. Is completely immersive and feels 100% real. Is virtual reality, but will be only reality that you will know for the rest of your life, boy. The huge man held his fingers to the throat of 6 people before he found one he was looking for, with the 7th. He dragged the chair away from the others and unlatched the helmet on the man's head. This is only way you stop playing, he said as he pointed to the dead man. You die. Once I put this headgear on you, there is no hope left. Understand? Ramson felt shivers of ice forming on his spine. Why should I be afraid of a video game? Stanislav cracked a toothy grin. I knew it. Just saying to myself, I bet the boy is wondering why he put him in game. Eh? Not just shoot foot and knee until you talk, da? You will see. You will see. Stanislav sat the helmet on the ground and picked the dead man up, chair and all. He flung the corpse across the room with one hand and it hit the ground with a metallic clang. Ramson, wide-eyed, looked back to the row of captives. Now that his eyes had adjusted, the situation became clearer. IVs hung behind each of them, dripping clear fluid into their arms. All wore diapers. Here are rules. You tell me where money is, and big friend Stanislav will kill quickly. Right now, I promise you not to feel a thing. He bent his knees so he could look Ramson in the eyes. When I put helmet on your head, you can only free self by telling me where money is. You just say that you want to cooperate, and then say where money is. We will look. If there, then I will take you out of game and kill you fast. Maybe you make feel a little bit just for forcing me to look and hook you up. Point is, you will be free of game. He drew a huge knife from around his back. In Ramson's hands, it would have been a short sword. In Stanislav's mitts, it was a letter opener. If you do not talk, then you will die in there. And that is not something you'll want. Yet. He sighed. I like you, Ramson. You are brave and hold tongue when you should speak. I respect that. But I tell you true, if you die in game, you will never leave it. Your mind will automatically be uploaded into game system, and you will live out a million hells before power finally goes out. That man. The brute pointed at the pile of chair and man he had tossed away like trash a few seconds ago. Is still playing. He will always play. He no get out. He suffer now in ways you cannot fathom. He scream about things you cannot imagine. Stanislav's body quaked as he shivered at the thought. Torture scared even me. Stanislav shook his head with a look of pity that frightened Ramson more than the motionless captives. A thug like Stanislav never felt bad for the things he did. Stanislav waved the knife in Ramson's face, his right eyebrow raised in a question. When no answer came, he shook his head, stood, and placed the knife behind his back. The hairy brute dragged his chair over to the empty spot that he had just created, and then turned the chair so Ramson could see the body that had been so casually thrown aside. The man's blank eyes stared back at him, burrowing into his soul. A look of unfettered horror still etched on the dead man's features. The corpse's mouth was locked open, lips peeled back, exposing poorly kept teeth. The man had died screaming. Blood was flecked all over his chin and around his lips. He had died hard, writhing in pain and terror before he had most likely choked on his tongue or his own blood. Stanislav noticed him eyeing the body. Ah, you see poor Pyotr, do you? He did not steal from us. His crime not so great as yours. But I have big heart. I gave Pyotr a chance. I placed him on easy mode. I give him chance like you. But like you, he thinks he is a man's man and refuses to make restitution. It takes him 2 days to get where he is now. The bearish man taped Ramson's hands even more tightly together. A guttural gurgle rose from his throat, and he turned his head to spit a gob of yellow phlegm onto Piotr's forehead. The fool. He makes me kill him over a debt of honor. He slid Ramson's chair against the wall. You will go into hardcore mode. Yet, we will be putting your balls to the walls, yes? You will enter on nightmare mode. Da. Stanislav bent over and picked up the headgear. He polished an area with the elbow of his shirt sleeve and gave it a once-over, nodded, and perched it on Ramson's head. I don't suppose you want to be smart and just tell me who has the money, eh? We know that you don't have it, or we would have found already. I promise, tell me now. You die quick. Easy. Ramson considered it. Perhaps this would be the time for him to talk about Vadim. If he could convince his captor the money was lost, he might be able to protect Yekaterina and save himself a great deal of grief. It was worth a try. Stanislav, he gasped, unable to entirely hide the terror he felt. I'll tell you what I can, I swear, but it won't do you any good. I have no idea where the money is, and I have no idea of how to find it. Ramson hated himself for caving in so quickly, but he knew that the moment he entered the game, he was never going to get out. This was the only card he had to play. But he didn't know if it was a trump card or a chump card. If this worked, then Stanislav would kill him. He wouldn't have to worry about going into the system. The big man cracked his neck as he twisted it from side to side. It was disturbing noise in the near dark of the room. It sounded like bones, twisting, snapping. The Valka crossed his hairy arms and gazed into Ramson's eyes. I am listening. I gave the money to a friend. His name was Vadim. Stanislav scowled. His name was Vadim, you say? What happened? Did he change his name and go into hiding? The disbelief etched on the man's face and the skepticism in his voice were apparent. The big man was sharp, of that he had no doubt, but Ramzan didn't know if he was bright enough to catch on. Stanislav made a face like he sucked on a rotten lemon slice. Vadum. He shook his head. I think not. He hooked a massive finger under Ramzan's chin and forced him to make eye contact. I talked to Vadum for quite some time. He was a good kid. Sad that he knew you. Otherwise, he would be alive now. To think, I had some respect for you. This kid has balls. Sure, I will probably stomp on them. Crush them in a vice or even cut them off. He made a scissor motion with his fingers. But no matter what I do, he will not talk. He shook his head in disappointment. You know, Vadam? He was tough, brave. He had no idea why I was there. But whenever I asked him about you, he not talk at all. He was, as the Americans say, a stand-up guy. He sneered at Ramzan. You, on other hand. He rolled his eyes to the ceiling and searched for the word. Sully friend's name so that you do not suffer. In Chechnya, we would cut out our own tongue before we would betray a brother. He stuck one of his hairy mitts into a pocket and jabbed a finger into the other hand, from the other hand into Ramzan's chest. It felt like a steel rod. You dirty the name of a good man who died because of your mistake. I offer to kill you quickly. No more. He bared his teeth. That option is gone. Now you suffer. If you are smart, you will tell me where the money went. If you do, maybe you won't die in there. The grimace turned into a smile. Maybe. He jammed the helmet onto Ramzan's head, and the world went away. Pitch black. No sound. His head was encased in a biometric foam. He only knew that because he played a fully immersive MMORPG before. He also knew that as soon as the headset turned on, he would lose all the sensory information from his body and would instead have false sensations fed in through the helmet. It would feel utterly real. He wouldn't be able to differentiate the game from reality. He had played the game War Bonded, and he was all too familiar with how a cut felt in the game compared to a cut in real life if you didn't turn down the pain settings. Something told him he wasn't going to be able to manipulate the settings in this particular game. All right. Well, that was the first chapter. You can see I get right into the nook and the crook and start off with him getting into the game by the end of the first chapter. It's maybe about 13 pages in. And chapter 2 is the character mutilation scene, which is where Ramzan pretty much figures out what he's going to be as a player in the game, what class and what his role is going to be, and it's not pretty. But anyway, it does play on several things. I do want to say that I kind of melded a bunch of different horror genres together. I have slasher, I have werewolves, I have zombies, I have a blobby kind of monster, just to name a few. And there's other things in here as well. But basically, I tried to throw in everything that I enjoyed in horror and had even included like really small Easter eggs in the book so that if you are any kind of a horror fan whatsoever, there are bits in it from horror songs. If you've ever heard, hey Tom, it's me, Bob, from the office down the hall, just let me in. All I want to do is eat your brains. Great song. I listen to it a lot. And I have a little bit of a nod to that song in the novel. So there's a ton of Easter eggs, just so you're aware. If you're not into horror, I still think it's a really good story. It's a really fun book. And it's just about one guy who's an anti-hero because Ramzan is not a nice guy. He doesn't play nice, he doesn't play fair, and he does what it takes to survive. If you're looking for a noble hero, Ramzan is not the guy for you. I didn't want to have one of those like milquetoast little guys running through the woods trying to be okay when he's got to do really hard, nasty, dirty things. I wanted somebody who could do the hard stuff and not blink. I wanted somebody who could blink when they had blood come into their eyes from the things they were doing. And that's Ramzan. He's a survivor. If anybody's a survivor, This guy's it. I don't care what scenario you put him in, he's going to figure out a way to live. And if he fails, well, he's got another shot. It is a video game for the most part. Um, but he won't make the same mistakes twice. That's a promise. And it turns out a lot of his weaknesses may be other people. And when he tries to be nice and play good, but there's one character in the novel that I wrote explicitly for the audiobook, and that is Blair. Blair is a nod, of course, to Linda Blair, who was in The Exorcist playing Reagan, one of my favorite movies and one of my favorite characters. And Blair literally wrote herself. And just in case you were wondering, I didn't do any of her dialogue. I didn't tell Blair what to do. I just kind of had her show up and things happened. I really don't want to say I didn't have any control over Blair, but Blair was alive as far as I was concerned, which is a little bit concerning because Blair is an evil demon. Yep, she's an AI demon, and I mean, in both senses of the word, she's both of those things all at the same time. And Blair was written for Annalise Rennie, who, after hearing that first chapter, after I posted that on Royal Road, she got really excited and texted me and said, "Hey, I recorded the entire first chapter. Listen to this." And she was the one that said she wanted to do it. And I basically had most of the book done at that point. And I was only holding off because I have another book coming out very soon for another company. And I promised to have them, because they accepted me in a long time ago, to have them do everything first. But it was taking so long, and I knew things at my job were getting tenuous, and I wanted to get things out there just in case I lost my job, which I did. so I had something to fall back on. So I couldn't hold off forever. So I basically had this done in no time at all. I mean, it was like add 5,000 words to it, and it was finished. And this is the result. So if you're really interested in something, scary, fun, exciting, full of action, those sorts of things, this is the book to check out. The Nightmare Game System, like I said, is not for the weak of heart. It does get really graphic in the first couple chapters. After that, I know it tones down. To me, a Serbian film was kind of boring with the gore. So if it didn't affect me, remember, I'm a film director. I may not be actively working as one, but I still am one, and I've seen just about everything you can see. So it's not going to really bother me, the things that happen. But it could bother you. So again, if it's not something you can handle, don't pick up the book. But we do have it coming out real soon, and I'm getting a phone call, so we'll chat later. Thanks.